Welcome to the Food Professor Podcast, presented by Cattle, Season 5, the Back to School episode. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm the Food Professor, Sylvain Charlebois, who's very busy while it's first week back to school.
That's right. Welcome back to school, Professor. And our special guest this week is from the global organization that keeps products moving. You know them, you love them. Francois Bouchard, Senior Vice President, Subscriber Engagement at GS1 Canada, which is, of course, the global organization that's the key nervous system, really, of industry. We recorded this interview live at CL. I talked to Francois about their all-new 2D barcode, which I think you're pretty excited about, right, Sylvain?
Barcodes are everywhere. We never think about them, but barcodes are really important for the food industry. It's about traceability. It's about knowing. It's about scanning. It's about knowing where your products come from, all that stuff. And of course, GS1 is behind all of that technology. So I was very happy that Francois accepted our invitation.
And did you write an op-ed this summer about the anniversary? Was it the 50th anniversary of the barcode?
Yes, absolutely. The first product that was actually scanned in Canada was in Dorval, Quebec. It was a Wrigley's gum package, and that gum package can be found in a museum in Washington. Did you know that?
I did. The trivia that's bouncing around in that head of yours just never.
I tell you, yeah, and it was actually scanned at a Steinberg.
Oh, I loved Steinberg's in Ottawa.
Yes,
shop there all the time. Now, for our listeners, it's not really a technical, so to speak, interview, but I was really fascinated with what's happening with the 2D barcode, like particularly that. If there was a product recall, the 2D barcode would alert the point of sale system. Like there's a lot more information in it, which I thought, wow,
it's about capturing data and more data. That's the problem with the one-line barcode. It has severe limitation when it comes to data, and obviously because of consumers' expectations, they're looking for more information at the point of sale. So obviously you need something. You need a mechanism to allow them to know more about the product. So obviously, the barcode is a automatic solution.
Right on.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's a big day here in Ontario. Listeners are listening to this on Thursday. It's Wednesday today. I know where I'm going to be at 7:00 tomorrow morning. I'm going to be at one of my local 4,200 convenience stores buying some beer. Kickstart my day at 7 a.m. in the morning because they can start selling at 7 a.m. A little liquid courage to get me through my podcasting for the day. It's also a new day for the beer store, which if you follow the structure of liquor sales in Ontario, they've had kind of a big monopoly. The government's paying or not paying, we don't know, $250 million to get out of an agreement early.
Allegedly, yeah.
Well, there's money. We'll see if it's ever get paid. But the beer store is expanding their assortment basically as of tomorrow as well, to sell what the C stores sell and make their money on snacks and energy drinks. So what do you think of all this? What do you make of all this?
The convenience store circuit is expanding in Ontario. More competition. I'm actually happy for Ontarians because they're actually being treated like adults for once.
Is it more competition or is it more access? It doesn't feel like more competition-ish, really. It feels like more access. I mean, the prices are plus or minus going to not be wildly different.
Well, I mean, if you increase access, you typically do put more pressure on prices and quality and things like that. It'll be interesting. At the beginning, it's going to be tough to really assess how the market will transpire. But actually, probably in a year or two from now, it'll be really interesting to see who survives, who's selling what and where. I mean, it's like Quebec. Other provinces have done it. Ontario's not reinventing the wheel here.
Sure.
It's just a matter of joining the 21st century, really. And I've always believed that Ontarians have a really bizarre relationship with alcohol in general. I mean, some columnists have actually called this event as being detrimental to healthcare. I mean, they actually think that the healthcare system in Ontario will collapse as a result of giving more access to Ontarians, to more access of alcohol to Ontarians. So it's really just relax, take one day at a time. Do like what Michael LeBlanc's doing. Show up tomorrow morning, 7:00, buy some beer, have one in the parking lot, call up a taxi, go home, you're done. That's great.
Well, it's true that hyperbole is the biggest and best thing ever, for sure, when it comes to these things. I did want to touch on an issue, though, and maybe you can help me out. So where you live today, this is not the case in Nova Scotia, but in Quebec that you're familiar with. Let's talk about empties, because there is a rule as I understand it, that if you're under 4,000 square foot, which most C-stores would be, you don't have to take empties back, which means if you run the Metro next door, you've got to take their empties back. And, historically through Ontario, we've actually had a very, very efficient process through the beer store of taking empties back. What do you make? Like I've heard some of the mid-sized grocers are like, if I got to take these C-store guys back, I don't want my license. Like, of course, you have to be selling beer to take beer back, but I think I'm more focused on understanding this part of the
entire cycle. No, absolutely. No, it's absolutely true, and it's quite the challenge. Of course, I call it green logistics. So actually completing the loop, getting actually people back to bring back returns essentially, and compensate them if there is money involved. Of course,
very high. It's a very high return rate in Ontario, like in excess of the 90s.
Yeah, it was, and the Quebec system is not perfect there, to be honest. It's a work in progress, and they are actually making some changes as we speak. And in Ontario, I think that there is some infrastructure there to actually do a better job, I think, with the beer store. And I do think that at some point you got to think about, the entire loop, because a lot of the discussions have been around selling. But how do you actually make sure that people return their bottles and everything else? Here in Nova Scotia, the system is not is okay. You basically bring back, there are depots in different places. You just bring back your bottles and up you go. And it's very convenient, to be honest. You kind of get used to it. I actually lived in 4 provinces, and all 4 systems are a little bit different. You kind of figure it out. So I'm pretty sure in Ontario at some point people will figure it out.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. The only challenge for convenience stores and grocery stores in particular is that when they actually accept returns, you never know what's in the bottles and the cans. And one example that comes up a lot is Corona. Because a lot of people put lime, drinking lime, and that lime stays in that bottle forever, and it stinks. And so grocers tend not to like that at all. C-store operators as well.
Well, it all becomes a trade-off, right? Is having a liquor or beer license as a grocery store worth the trade-off of whatever may come? I guess early days, obviously, it's just today. So we'll see how it evolves
absolutely,
in Ontario.
Well,
let's talk about... Yeah, well, thank you. All right, tit for tat. China responds to aluminum and EV tariffs with threats against canola, threats against our farmer. No surprise there. Yeah. Did the government here play the best hand they had, considering the upcoming opening of the CUSMA negotiations with the Americans and Mexicans? It's hard to imagine us being offside from the Americans in this tariff.
Oh, right? Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that if the Conservatives would have been in power, it would have been the same outcome, to be honest. I actually wrote an op-ed on this today, just questioning how protective should we be about a new sector, essentially. And that's really, it boils down to, building a battery sector, supporting EVs, getting greener, which I think we all want. But at the end of the day, I mean, how protective should we be? Because at the end, often farmers tend to really have the short end of the stick all the time. We saw that with Huawei 5 years ago, and it's the same thing all over again. They hate it. Prices have dropped now, I believe, by more than 5%, so they're getting less money for their crops now. They're upset. I mean, it's $5 billion worth of revenues, 43,000 canola farmers, and China is a very, very astute trading partner. They know that when you hit canola, it's not just about economic hurt; it's about symbolism. Canola is Canada oil. Canola, it was created here. The symbolism for China means a whole lot, and of course, it means a lot to a lot of farmers in Canada. But again, it's complicated because the Americans are doing the same exact thing. Same with Huawei. Huawei was a deal made with the Americans. She landed in Vancouver. She had to be arrested, and the rest unfolded. What I question is that it's always Canada paying. It's always someone in Canada paying. And who's paying? farmers all the time.
Well, I mean, I think of it at a different level. You mentioned you think of it as protecting one industry, the EV. Canada's pumped billions into building our domestic EV. I think of it more being in line with the Americans because you and I both know that whether it's the Democrats or Republicans, we're in a new day with trade, and both they have different approaches. But to be out of step with the Americans with the upcoming opening of the trade agreement, I think at the higher level, whether you're protecting EVs or not, I think is highly problematic, and I think it was the best hand we had to play.
Yeah, but we did pour almost $50 billion worth of money into this sector, and it wasn't necessarily because of the Americans. It wasn't necessarily forced upon us to do that, by the way. So that's one thing I want to put on the table here.
Well, it was, though, I would say, there's an entire program from the Biden government to grow technology, kind of like, remember Reagan's Star Wars? We had to do it to compete to get some build happening here in Canada.
Yeah, but the Americans will likely be competitive. Do you think Canada will be competitive? Look at dairy. Every time I hear about EVs, I constantly think about dairy. We've poured billions of dollars in this sector. It's a very restrictive sector. It's closed. It's protected. And look what we get in return. We get higher prices. Quality is questionable. And our position on dairy affects other sectors domestically in ag. I mean, so that's why
I feel like automotive is more, the borders are more, the products flow. I mean, you would never say that dairy and automotive are similar in that regard, but I mean, the products flow back and forth. It
feels we're going to be producing for ourselves. If you can't think about trades, if you continuously put tariffs on your products, that's the thing. So we're 41 million people. Can we actually become quite competitive, turn the corner, get ourselves to become greener while other nations around the world are actually producing cheaper, greener cars? If the focus is climate change, if our objective is to deal with climate change, why aren't we supportive of cheaper, greener solutions?
Yeah. Well, I think the focus is not to get punished by the Americans. That's what I think the focus is. Now, you raise a very interesting question.
If the Americans are able to build a cheaper, greener car, why not buy from them?
Oh, that's fine. We're just not going to buy from China because the Americans don't want China backdooring into
why did we invest almost $50 billion of our money into a sector that may not be efficient and competitive? That's the question I'm asking. Maybe it will. Maybe it will. But the setup that I'm seeing right now, I don't see the incentives for the sector to become more competitive because we've seen this play before.
Okay. Yeah.
That's the only. And like I said, it didn't matter who was in power. I think that if Pierre Poilievre would have been prime minister, it would have been the same outcome. In fact, he asked for tariffs. He was asking for tariffs before Trudeau actually implemented them.
Yeah, I agree. And there's been some commentary today. The last thing I'll say is, they didn't think this would happen. Or listen, our Canadian men and women are very sophisticated in terms of trade. Yeah, they didn't know this would happen.
I mean, it wasn't a surprise. Come on.
No, come on. They're very sophisticated traders.
But here's the irony, though. History is so ironic. So you have Pierre Trudeau in the 70s. He idolized China, idolized China. Yeah. And his own son is now prime minister, and he's hated by China.
Well, it's not a bad thing. It actually puts more credit to him for me for that.
His history, it seems, has a sense of irony for sure. I think it's a little bit funny.
Now, you mentioned sustainability. I wanted to mention to our listeners that one of the things we're going to be asking you about through our friends at Cattle is how much sustainability matters anymore. How much local matters in your decisions anymore.
Do you care?
With the current economic climate of food affordability, where does it rank? Do you care anymore? Or are you just like, listen, I need to get food on the table? Now, speaking of
currency, are you willing to pay for it?
Speaking of food on the table, this week we also had another drop in the Bank Canada overnight rate, which I think, what's that, the third one? And I expect there to be more. What any comments on how that affects what's on our plate or prices or the ag sector?
The Bank of Canada is fully aware that interest rates have actually played a much larger role in people's affordability crisis than food prices. The Bank of Canada knows this. When you think of credit cards, car debt, mortgages, debt in general, I mean, you name it, it's just interest rates have been really, really hard. The 10 consecutive hikes, it's just been insanely
tough,
violent.
tough. Yeah.
For a lot of people.
With inflation, right? As they try to kind of stick the landing in terms of a soft landing.
Let's say you carry a mortgage of $500,000, okay, on a variable rate, amortized over 25 years. With another decrease in October, you're going to be saving almost $2,000 in payments over the year, okay? Food prices have gone up by about $1,000 this year for a family of 4.
As you predicted. Okay?
Yeah, as we predicted. And so let's stop. I mean, yes, food prices are higher and it's tough, but when you look at Canada's food inflation rate compared to other nations, we're not doing so badly. But interest rates are really the bigger problem here. Now, with rates getting lower, the first focus that I have, of course, is the Canadian dollar. What will happen to the Canadian dollar? Did you look at the Canadian dollar? It's not going anywhere. That's good news.
Yeah.
So rates are going down. The dollar will help us at the grocery store because lots of places we import food. So that's not going to be an impact. Sure. And so I think it's actually going to be a nice fall for a lot of people who are struggling out there for sure.
All right. Well, that's a great message. Fantastic.
Yeah.
I wanted to pick up on a story we touched on last week that continued to have some reverberations in the industry this week, which was the new restrictions around temporary foreign workers. And, you know, as I watched, the restaurant lobby seemed to be crying the loudest. What does this really mean? I wanted to ask you, what does this really mean for, a program designed? It's not really a program that was designed to staff a drive-through. What options do they have now? If you think now this has been run through, we may see a new government in the fullness of time. Again, another big busy week, right? The NDP ending their agreement with the Liberals, putting the Liberals back in a minority position. But what options? Like, let me ask the question differently. If you were sitting at one of these you're leading one of these big coffee shops or grocers or whatever, and now you've got less access to people than you thought you had, what would you do? Close locations, invest in technology? I mean, let's talk practical solutions. In that
I've talked to franchisees and figure out a plan to automate. To be honest, I mean that's really the key here. You're not going to create bodies or Canadians that want to work low wages, and so I think really the out for many is either to close or to automate.
So you do not see it viable raising. It's not, the minimum rates in province vary, but no one is really paying the minimum because you've got to pay more. Like you could be earning $20 to work at a drive-through. So, but you don't see them saying, I'm going to pay 25 and close that gap that way, right?
It really, I don't know, like in many areas, prices do matter. There is a case study that we could look into. It's California, because they did increase their minimum wage to $20 overnight. That was a few months ago
in the fast food.
I've been looking for some data to see whether or not there's been some closures.
Yeah,
and how prices. So we've seen some reports that prices have actually been adjusted as a result.
There's been some anecdotal.
You got to be careful because you don't know whether or not these studies or surveys are truthful, or do they actually
representative.
They represent exactly what's happening with the market. So, but I do think that if I were a franchise operator or a franchisee, I would look at California and see what's happening there. I would pick up the phone, call a few people. What have you seen?
What did you do? That's a great idea. What did you do?
Yeah, and that's what I would do for sure. And perhaps there is that space. Let's face it, for restaurant operators, real estate, labor are the two biggest items for them. And so you need to make sure that if you are to increase wages, well, maybe there is space and people are willing to pay. Who knows?
Sticking with, I don't know, drive-through or coffee. I don't know if we weren't talking about them specifically, but let's talk about Starbucks. It's something we didn't talk about in our kind of what happened over the summer episode. So big changes at Starbucks. They had a president who didn't last a year. I saw him as more of a operator, but they seem to want a visionary, right? So they brought in a new CEO, and there's a raft of issues. I mean, everyone's looking for growth. We talked about in our last season, Starbucks had hit less growth than more. There's lots of anecdotal evidence, including from myself. You order in advance and you wind up in a line. Like the new CEO's got their hands full, right?
Yeah. No kidding. And well, I mean, Starbucks is a victim of its own success with customization. I mean, when you go to Starbucks, you're special. You have your name on your mug. Your name is called out, and you have a barista preparing your perfect coffee for you. I mean, that's really, but that slows things down, right?
I heard some crazy number, by the way, that there is upwards of like 3 billion different permutations that you can do.
No, it's crazy. It's crazy. Right? And so I think the new CEO will basically, Brian Nichol will actually just look at all of these options and see how they can actually streamline some of these options to make sure that the barista doesn't need a PhD to prepare, how many coffees that are possible, because it's getting complicated out there, to be honest. And so really, I think it boils down to adjusting operations. I think that Brian Nichol will do that. He did that at Taco Bell. He did that at Chipotle. And he's probably going to be doing the same at Starbucks. He's not going to be looking at the number of restaurants. He's going to be looking at margins very much. Because I think Howard Schultz's legacy was about growth in terms of the number of operations. Yeah. Now they're number 2 in the world.
30,000 units, something like that?
39. 39. They're number 2 now after they just passed Subway. So I think the focus is going to be about making, running restaurants that are more profitable, not less. And so you got to look at the app, you got to look at the time of service, and so on and so forth, the number of ingredients, and perhaps come up with another pumpkin spice campaign.
Still popular, by the way. I look at some traffic numbers. When they roll out pumpkin spice, still drives traffic.
They started on August 21st this year, which is the earliest ever. And by the way, Michael, they are generating more revenue with that campaign, selling fewer cups. So, that's a sign. That's a sign.
The other thing I think that Howard Schultz was able to create with Starbucks that I'm really interested to see the outcome of, which, I mean, hearkening back to something, if we had Tony Chapman asking about him about Starbucks, they undeniably created a place to be. Like, it was meaningful to go to a Starbucks. A third place, as they call it. But, I passed a local Starbucks and it was just a takeout place. So do they lose a bit of magic if they're just like a drive-through takeout, here's your coffee and go? So somehow they've got to figure that mix out, right?
Pretty much, yeah. I don't think that Brian Nichol will focus on the experience. It's kind of there, but I think he'll just focus on making sure that when someone shows up, they don't wait 20 minutes for their mug. I think that's really going to be the priority for a while. And like I said, he's done magic with Taco Bell. Taco Bell when he left Taco Bell, it was really efficient. Same with Chipotle. I mean, Chipotle really had, if you remember, they had to deal with a major chicken recall.
Yep.
They made a lot of people sick. They actually had to deal with a crisis, and Brian Nichol cleaned all that up. And I mean, at some point, a lot of people thought that it was going to be the end of the chain.
Yeah.
And he turned it all around. He doesn't have to deal with that crap now with Starbucks. There's no crisis. It's just a matter of margins and profitability now.
All right. Now, just before we get back to, our interview with our friend from GS1. Couche-Tard, we talked about it. Couche-Tard and 7-Eleven. Do you have any?
Deal or no deal, Mike?
If you were a betting man, what would you bet?
I got to tell you, I've been watching the market since the offer was announced, and I got to tell you, and a few analysts on Bay Street are starting to really
take it seriously. I think. Eh?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So a couple of analysts that I actually respect have now said, I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen. Well, because financially, I think people were skeptical. They thought, well, Couche-Tard, they're number 5 in the world, 17,000 stores versus 85,000 stores with 7-Eleven, Japan. They don't like to be bought, all that stuff. But now I think people better understand that, first of all, Couche-Tard's market cap is superior to 7-Eleven. It's actually, they have more money. They're worth more than 7-Eleven. Yeah. And 2, Japan is not necessarily pushing back here. They're open. And Couche-Tard has a lot of experience buying foreign-owned companies in Asia as well. And they're doing it the right way. They're not doing an hostile takeover. They've made it public. It's open. They just say, "Hey, listen, we're interested in buying you. Can we dance? Do you tango?" So I think that's what they're doing right now. They're tangoing. The only headwind that I see is, and we talked about it last week, is out of the U.S. The regulatory side is not going to be a walk in a park, I don't think.
Yep. Good point. Good point. All right. Well, let's, just before we get to our great interview with Francois from GS1, let's hear from our presenting sponsor, Cattle, and their great offerings. Ever feel like the world of ratings and reviews needed a superhero? Well, enter Cattle, the caped crusader with Canada's largest, most diverse, and daily active consumer panels. That's right, Cattle is not your average podcast sponsor. So why choose Cattle? Because Cattle excels in consumer insights from your consumer while also blazing trails in the realm of ratings and reviews, pioneering the future landscape of user-generated content. Beyond the valuable syndicated receipt data, they stand as unparalleled collector of reviews at scale, irrespective of category or price point. A testament to their impact, partnerships with giants like Walmart, Canadian Tire, and more. Visit AskCattle.com now for an exclusive The Food Professor podcast listener discount on your first review or research campaign today. That's AskCattle.com. Francois, welcome to The Food Professor podcast. How are you doing this morning? We're here at the last day of the Big CL Food Innovation Show. Your head must be, if you're like me, your neck must be sore. My head's looking every which way. It's like on spin cycle. How's it been for you?
It's been wonderful. I am a foodie. I used to be a grocer by profession, so for me, this is homecoming, if you wish.
Fantastic. Now, so all right. So who are you, and what do you do for a living?
So, Francois Bouchard. I am the Executive Vice President of Community Engagement and Partnerships at GS1 Canada. So, GS1 Canada is a not-for-profit organization worldwide. So there's GS1 in 116 countries, and we're probably better known for the barcodes on the products that you see, but it's so much more than the barcodes.
You guys, I feel like and many of our listeners probably don't know who you are, but it feels like you're the plumbing or the infrastructure behind consumer goods, right? Sometimes known, but really an industry thing. Consumers don't know you exist, but that's not the point, right? Am I getting that kind of...
You're absolutely right. So we enable supply chain. We also enable patient safety. So think of going to the hospital, the right bracelets, the right products given to the right, at the right time by the right person. But we've been around for many, many years. The barcode, as we know it, has been around for 50 years.
Right. And did you guys invent the barcode, or was the barcode? I don't know where the barcode was invented. Like, did you invent it and then, commercialize it, or make it not? You're not for profit, but bring it out. Tell me a little bit about the barcode.
Well, it's interesting. So the barcode actually, was initiated, in the United States with a group of, manufacturers that were looking for a better way to share information and to be able to actually bring in. So they brought in retailers and saying, what is a better way to do it? Launched first initially in 1973. First barcode was scanned in the U.S. at the Dayton grocery store, and then the second barcode was scanned right here in Montreal.
Come on.
At the Steinberg store.
Wow. Steinberg's. I haven't heard that name. I grew up in Ottawa. We used to shop at Steinberg's all the time.
I used to have a Steinberg franchise, so certainly very, very interesting. But Steinberg's was the second one in the world to scan a barcode. So it was very, very interesting. The group got together, and they said we have to create it, and they actually created the standardization, and why and how all the dimensions of a barcode, so it would actually work, and everybody adopted it.
Was there a debate at the time, and it's not unlike, there was a big debate in, of course, VHS versus Betamax, or even there, I know in infrastructure, there's a big debate in container format. Like there's 50 different types and formats, but then somebody got everybody together to agree on one? Was there a big debate? Was there another competing format, or was this just the obvious choice?
Well, it was interesting because in North America, there was no other. I mean, this was in a day where you would actually stamp a price on a product, and then the cashier would actually punch it in, typically right into the cash register.
Right.
They wanted to eliminate all that. I mean, I started my career, I paid for my universities, taking little price tags off the products, putting new ones on after the sales cycle. So in North America, they got together and said, there's got to be a better way. Europe was on a different path, and that's why you see the European codes are longer than the North American codes.
Okay.
So obviously
Those
now
Europeans, they all got to do something. They always got to do something different. From the metric system to.
So they have additional digits, and you will actually see that they're actually a little longer than the North American ones.
What's the purpose of that? What's the there's a visual difference, but what is there a reason for a longer format?
Well, I think it's how, so if you look at the barcode, then first 5-digit identifiers usually identify the organization that's producing the product, right?
Okay.
And then the last 5 digits are more about the product, the type, the variety, so that they have a sequence. There's different identifiers. There's also country identifiers that are sometimes built into the barcode. So there's a whole reason. So they were in a path, and all of a sudden we said, we kind of have to come together. And that's how GS1 was created. Global standards, one per country. So that's what GS1 stands for.
Global I never connected those dots. This is why I love coming to Sal and meeting people like you. Like, sometimes it's an obvious question, but there you go. What brings you to Seattle?
Well, interestingly enough, and as I said earlier, as a foodie, personally, and lots of interest here. But obviously, we work with retailers, we work with manufacturers every single day. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our subscribers are actually here at the shows. We're very excited to come in and support some of the the innovation, which are really just startups.
Yep.
We see the barcode as a little bit like a trademark. Like, it has to be unique to you, to your products would be recognized. It can't be duplicated. It can't belong to anyone else. It has to prepare you to be able to to sell in Montreal, but in the province, in the country, possibly to export. So we really want to be here from the beginning. We really want the companies, a lot of companies obviously here are our subscribers and use our services, but we also want to make sure that we get to the food incubators. We want to make sure we get to universities, to academia. When you're launching a new product, you should really think about it. This is really this is starting base. You absolutely need it to be able to get into supply chain, to be able to do a recall, to satisfy regulation. But it's not necessarily they're excited about their products and forget that that's just part of their packaging. It needs to be thought about.
Now walk me through, or walk the listeners through, me too. I've applied for a few barcodes, but I can't remember, it's a long time ago. Yeah. Talk about just the basic steps of a process of getting a barcode. You're one of the vendors here, you're launching a new product, and you go to a website and just apply and get a barcode. Just walk us through a few of the steps.
Yeah, so typically you would go into our website, and there's a portal, and I want to become a subscriber, and then obviously it's really finding the right fit. How many products do you have? How many products do you need? How many barcodes will you need? And we have different offers for different size of companies, right? So we have offers to support, and our board of governors has been really clear on supporting small, medium, micro enterprises.
And when you say offer, there's a price. There's a cost associated with it, right?
So if you need 1, you need 10, you need 50, you need 100. I mean, just, what is it that you need? Thinking of what's going to happen, you don't want to come back and, so really thinking about what does your project look like? What does your growth look like for the next, call it 2 to 3 years? And then that's how you base this. And then from there, we work with them to say, what do your trading partners require? Do they need images for planograms? Do they need images for marketing and flyers? Do they need information for their websites? So thinking about, as part of the industry managed solutions, we also offer a variety of services to support that ability to trade.
Things maybe entrepreneurs hadn't thought of. Here's the 50 things you may not, particularly, of course, if you're going to go sell it at major retailers, but even specialty stores. Here's all the things you may or may not have considered, and you're there to help kind of walk them through that process.
And we have a subscriber-enabled team that really supports them and helps them and say, weights and dimensions is important because the self-serve caches are depending on the weights and dimensions. So when they get out,
or e-commerce, I suppose,
e-commerce for distribution, the automation that's happening obviously across. But it's really to support all those use cases. We're also looking right now at everything that's ESG. Recycling, extra deposit programs, what to do if I'm a consumer, where does it go? Does a deposit attached to it? Does it go in a recycling box? So there's a lot of information that's shared with many, and the idea for us at GS1 is one to many. I'm a manufacturer, I have one product, but I want to trade with many trading partners. Instead of filling out what used to be listing forms one by one by one, I now have a standardized form that I can share with everyone. and hopefully have those discussions when I'm having the discussion with the buyers that are happening here at the show to say, I'm already compliant, I have everything you need. So if we agree on it, I'm ready to go. I've got everything to push to you.
Now, off mic, you're talking about a new type of barcode. I don't know if you're launching it here or it's just launching 2D barcode. Tell us all about it.
Well, as I said earlier, the linear barcode that everybody's used to, the lines on the black and white, is 50 years old. So obviously, the GS1 data matrix is obviously a two-dimensional barcode that contains a lot more information. It's not being launched here. It's a global effort. It's a worldwide initiative from GS1 Global. We are part of it. You will have seen it already happening in pharmaceutical products. So you'll probably see it already in your cupboards with a lot of products where you'll see two barcodes, one that's very tiny and then the linear barcode that you're used to. There'll be a period of transition. But the idea of the new barcode is it's much smaller, so manufacturers like it. It contains a lot more information. You can have a batch, a lot, and expiry date in it. You bring all that information forward, and you would see it, similar to what you're showing me now.
Oh, so for the listeners, I just picked up a coffee cup that I just ordered, actually, my Last Request barbecue coffee cup. And on the bottom, I've been wondering what the squiggly lines were because I'm starting to see them everywhere. This is the...
That's a two-dimensional barcode. There's a QR code, which the QR code is what you would have seen in the menu that brings you to a website.
Sure.
Then there's a GS1 data matrix that still includes your global trade identification number, the GTIN, and it has additional information. So it's you don't have to go to a website to get access to that information. So if you're doing a product recall, you can actually scan it to see if it was recalled, yes or not.
Interesting.
If the product is expired and you don't want to sell an expired product at your cash, the POS will actually stop the sale of it. When it scans it and saying, I'm sorry, product's expired, I'll go get you a new one. So there's a lot of application. If there was ever a product recall, it would be done in a lot and batch, which is much easier. It's, it can contain over 2,000 characters. It can be 85% destroyed. It will still read. It's got autocorrection. So it's got a lot of benefits.
Yeah. Well, 50 years. I mean, the world's changed a lot. And, it's funny when you say it out loud. It's like 50. What has changed in the past 50 years? Well, quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. And how long was it in development for? These things, I mean, when you launch global things, I mean, that's not overnight, right? I mean, it takes a lot of...
Yeah, the GS1 data matrix has been around for quite some time. There's been a lot of work and effort that's been done. It had to be tested to make sure it works in all the environments, whether it be refrigerated, frozen, that it works for all industries, because obviously it's we're talking about food today.
It's a mammoth undertaking. How many people work at GS1 around the world?
Well, around the world, I don't have the answer, to be honest. I know there's 116 countries, and we have some countries that just issue barcodes. We have others that support industries and a whole bunch of initiatives.
How many people in Canada?
We're just shy of 300.
300 people?
Yeah, that support our subscribers.
Wow. Well, I'm just thinking about multiply. As you said, it won't be that scale, but we're kind of a small, physically, but we're kind of a small nation. And wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And again, we're in multiple industries. We support multiple products, multiple use cases. You were thinking of food today because we're at Seattle, but I mean, certainly it's happening in healthcare.
Yeah,
think of everything that's
tied to
happening in
Armani and healthcare, and I guess you guys were a big, vaccines and all that stuff, right?
Vaccines, and obviously e-commerce exploding. It was always there, but in the recent years, even more so.
Sure.
Every barcode is important to identify the size, the color. It's not just,
Now, do you consider a technology like RFID a competitor or complementary product?
Complementary product. So, there's different use cases. Obviously, for us, what we're looking for as a standard-based organization is that the global trade identification number is always embedded in the symbology. So you have different symbology. You could have a QR code. You could have a GS1 data matrix. You could have a linear barcode. You can have RFID. For us, it's really using the standards so that the systems could all understand what they're talking about.
Okay.
And that's the key for us. That's the key that unlocks all the information that's behind it. It's that global identification trade number. Interesting.
If people want to go learn more about what's going on, this new 2D barcode, where do they go?
Well, they can go to gs1.ca. We're obviously, GS1, we're always present. We have webinars. We're accessible. Obviously, we're there.
You're here walking the floor.
Yeah, we're here walking the floor. We're supportive of all, and then we have webinars, and we have a social presence as well. One of our mandates is to educate and to help and support.
Yeah.
As I said, we're a not-for-profit organization. We're really there to facilitate trade and help supply chain and patient safety and everything else. So for us, it's really being accessible. That's good.
All right, well, thanks so much for sitting down and chatting with the Food Professor podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Well, that was, we've got a few more actually interviews from Seattle. It's the gift that keeps on giving, actually. For
I
the
know.
show.
I know. Well, everyone's there.
Everybody's
it's
there.
So convenient.
And that being said, we got lots of great guests coming up that we didn't record at Seattle that we're filling up the roster. So stay tuned for all that. Couple last things. In the WTF category, cloned cow milk coming to Canadian shelves near me. What the heck is going on here?
I thought we talked about this in June. Maybe not.
We did. We did talk about clone milk, but
clone meat or clone milk.
Clone
it's
milk.
The same thing. I mean, Health Canada is, according to some reports from the CBC, is about to approve clone meat and animals to be cloned to produce food for the human chain, essentially, and that would include dairy as well.
Do we need that? I mean, aren't we flushing dairy down the sink to make sure that we keep prices up? Do we need to have now cloned milk? I don't understand.
Be talking about that. Well, I mean, it's controversial. I think a lot of people don't understand what's going on here, and Health Canada hasn't really consulted with a whole lot of people, including Dairy Farmers of Canada, by the way.
It feels like if just because I can doesn't give it justification enough.
And just to clear things up here, so there's artificial insemination, which means you optimize animal genetics by crossing two animals to create a perfect animal. Okay. Cloning allows you to create the same animal, basically. Right. Okay, you extract cells, you produce an embryo, and then you implant the embryo into a female. And so that baby will be born the same way, but it's a clone. It's the same thing. Of course, there's a lot of trial and error. The technology has actually improved immensely since Dolly, that's right. Which was born in 1996, I believe. I can't remember. But anyways, cloning is actually allowed in different parts of the world, and Canada feels it's next. I'm not sure there's a social license here that is clear. I'm just looking at your face. I don't think you're into it.
I just don't think it's where we. Why are we going down the clone milk thing? I just don't get it. Are we short of milk suddenly? No. Anyway,
I honestly, like, financially, I don't see the incentive, to be honest, because artificial insemination is costly, but I can only assume that cloning an animal is even more costly. I mean, a lot of people want to clone their pets, for example. You have a dog? Huh?
Sure.
Ziggy? Sure. Wouldn't you want to clone Ziggy and have him forever?
I think that's a plot for a book by Stephen King called Pet Sematary, by the way.
Exactly.
Is I think the outcome. Because, of course, anyway, you can't clone their personality. You can clone a lot about them, but they may or may not be
a lot of naturalists, biologists, like people who believe in nature have reservations, obviously, with cloning. I honestly, if I think a technology can actually help the industry, I'm usually for it. I don't see the case here.
Okay.
Maybe it's something that I actually don't understand, but I don't see the case here, to be honest.
All right.
Starbucks is a bull that was well known in Quebec that actually reproduced itself, I think, 250,000 times or something. It was the perfect bull, and they actually created Starbucks 2, I believe.
Starbucks.
Now, I don't know.
Not the coffee shop, but a bull.
A bull.
Called Starbuck.
Yeah. They actually made a movie called Starbucks. A guy that went to a sperm bank and actually had 670 kids or something. And the name of the movie is Starbuck. So it's a well-known animal. Look it up.
Well, and it's a great character. One of my favorite TV shows, Battlestar Galactica. So
there you go.
To Starbuck. Last thing. So announced again, I mentioned it earlier in the show, Jagmeet Singh ended the confidence of supply agreement with the Liberal Party. So that puts them in, I guess, keeps them or puts them back as minority government. What should
I think the railway situation pushed him over, I think. What do you think?
That's a good question, because it also means what's going to happen with the Vancouver ports, who are on the edge of strike, and Air Canada pilots and all these things. I'm not sure. I think it's a political move. I think they're going into...
No, really?
Well, in other words, I don't think the timing was dictated by a move against Labor. I think that it was just a timing. It was going to happen.
Timing is weird because he's down in the polls. He's being destroyed. I mean, right now, if you look at polls, I don't know if you saw the Angus Reid poll today, there are more people voting for the Conservatives now, intend to vote for the Conservatives, versus Liberals and NDP combined now.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I think this is his way to kind of say, if you're thinking we're the same, we're different, and therefore put himself some distance. And
they're getting closer and closer. I think the Liberals are at 21%, and NDP they're at 19-20%. So it's a dangerous game. Frankly, the Liberals have options to stay in power with the Bloc. They have more than 30 seats in Quebec. And so you can actually deal with them as well. Liberals have options. So it's not going to be an easy government to bring down. So I'm sorry to say that to my friends, conservative friends, but that's the reality. I mean, a minority Liberal government will survive longer than a conservative government because a Liberal government will have more options.
Well, not that we're a political podcast, but I did want to bring it up because I wanted to just get your assessment of any stated or inferred policy by the NDP on the ag sector. Obviously, they're a friend of Labor. I don't know what their position is on temporary foreign workers. I think they generally aren't fond of it because they see it as importing underpriced talent. Any other thoughts that you have on or what you would expect to hear from Justin
Well,
Singh?
so if the NDP were in power, we would be in deep trouble with the railways. I can tell you that. I mean, bargaining can only go so far, especially in light of the fact that both collective agreements ended at the same time, and Mr. O'Regan, when he was Minister of Transportation, allowed that to happen. It really messed things up a little bit. Ottawa was really to blame here, and for immigration, Ottawa was still. I mean, Ottawa is fixing problems they've created in the first place.
So maybe we can't be worse off.
No, exactly. And so I don't know, like I think the NDP will have something interesting to contribute, but they're very much about boards. They're very much about urban centers. I've never felt that NDP understands rural communities and farmers in particular. They've never been close to farmers.
Which is funny. That's kind of the roots of the organization. If you think back to...
Of course it is. When I was
Western
in Saskatchewan...
Canada. Sure.
You got to think about Tommy Douglas. I mean, Tommy Douglas was very close to farmers, but Ottawa is different. Ottawa NDPs tend to attract urban votes, so it makes it a very urban party. And I would say that the Liberal government right now is a very urban-centric party as well. Right now, as it stands, it's not always the case, but because the Jean Chrétien Liberal government was much more spread out.
Okay.
Yeah. And frankly, because this is a ag and food podcast, you want balance. Like you want balance as much as possible, you know?
Yep. All right. Well, good thoughts. And a busy week around us. And next week we'll be busy as well. We're going to have Colleen Martin on the show, and she's going to be talking about our survey around e-commerce and grocery, which some would say is strong. Others would say, like me, is not strong, is lagging. And, consumers are not really adopting it the way a lot of us thought they might. So we'll learn more about that from Colleen. But until then,
I'll have some news to announce to you next week as well.
All right. Well, we'll talk again next week. I'm Michael LeBlanc, media entrepreneur, keynote speaker, podcaster, and a bunch of other things. And you are?
And I'm the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
All right. Safe travels, everybody.
Take care.